Hi, I'm Robert Oates, Chartered Biologist and Managing Director of Arbtech. When I set out to make this video, the plan was to record a high-level, generalised overview of bat surveys for planning applications. The trouble with that is, bat surveys are a big subject. There's several types, some of them are seasonal, and depending on the results, there may be downstream consequences. There's also nuances like biological records data searches, license applications, and mitigation to discuss. And of course, we need to cover important factors like costs, when and why you do them in the first place. The solution was to make a series of videos, starting with this one, and over the course of the series, answer your 20 most frequently asked questions about bat surveys. So let's get started. Super quick bit of background. In the UK, we have 17 species of bat, and all are protected to the same degree by various statutes, such as the Wildlife and Countryside Act and Conservation of Habitats and Species regulations. Disturbing bats or their roosts is a criminally prosecutable offence. Therefore, if you're planning to impact upon buildings, trees and other potential roosting sites in the course of your development, howsoever insignificant that impact may seem, you have a legal obligation to avoid disturbing bats as you do so. If you want to find out more about the legislation protecting bats, Lancashire Constabulary have a particularly useful page which sets out everything in layman's terms. Equally, your local planning authority has asked you for a bat survey so that they can discharge their obligations and ensure that biodiversity at all levels has been a material consideration in the decision to grant a planning consent. And that, in a nutshell, is why you need a bat survey. At this juncture, it's sensible to ask, how do I know if I need one? What's probably more useful though, is if I run through a brief list of reasons for why you're less likely to need a bat survey. And they include: your building is in a heavily urbanised area with very few green spaces or proximate habitat. It's an active industrial premises. It was built after the 1970s with very few gaps. Is a prefabricated building with steel and sheet materials. Has a very small cluttered roof space. Or is over construction or a state of dilapidation that doesn't allow for a stable environment. And I mean stable in terms of things like humidity, temperature, noise, vibration, light, things that bats like. So, what is a bat survey? In the context of obtaining a planning consent, there's quite a few different methods of surveying for bats. In almost all circumstances, the first step is to undertake a preliminary bat roost assessment, or PRA, so it seems sensible to start with this. You may hear PRAs variously referred to as a diurnal, initial, phase 1 or scoping bat survey. In all cases, the semantic variance isn't important. It all means the same thing, and what they entail, which we'll talk about in a moment, is specified in considerable detail in an industry-wide gold standard of practice, the Bat Conservation Trust's 2016 publication, Bat Surveys for Professional Ecologists, Good Practice Guidelines. First though, we need to understand what a PRA is for. A preliminary bat roost assessment is an exercise designed to assign to a structure something we call roost suitability, or habitat value is another way to think about it. Let me be ultra clear about that in case you missed it. A PRA is not an exercise designed to arrive at a binary outcome of either bats or no bats. Natural bat habitat has been in decline for centuries, and these days bats have substituted for that loss with our homes and other buildings. So this initial step can be better imagined as a filter to eliminate the need for further investigation. Known as phase 2 or emergence surveys, it's a more intensive survey effort that allow applicants to robustly demonstrate exactly bats or no bats. You might want to replay this next bit a couple of times because it's probably the most important part of the video. The primary purpose of a PRA is to identify, assess and categorise A. evidence of bat activity, and B. features on the exterior of a structure and or within a roof void so as to arrive at a habitat suitability classification. Those classifications are negligible, low, moderate and high. As you can probably guess, these are probabilistic in nature. Negligible, for example, well, good news for you because it requires nothing further, doesn't actually mean your property isn't used by bats as a roost, which we loosely define here as a feeding or resting place. It just means the risk of harm to bats in consequence of your development is acceptably low so as to allow for planning determination without further investigation. In the case of low, moderate and high roost suitability, normally your local planning authority's ecologist will expect to see more data in the form of an emergence survey before they will allow for a planning decision. In fairness to them, this isn't entirely their own doing. The National Planning Policy Framework and Guidelines, as well as ODPM Circular 0506, more or less demand that biodiversity is fully considered in the planning stage and cannot be dealt with as conditions of consent. There'll be more on that topic later in another video, but for now, suffice to say, a low, moderate or high suitability classification means your site will need further investigation in the form of a bat emergence survey. And so the next question might be, how is that assessment of roost suitability arrived at? A PRA includes a full internal and external physical inspection of your property. Here, ecologists are looking for evidence of bat activity, bats, dead bat carcasses, prey remains, droppings, etc. And to make an assessment of features suitable for roosting. Those features may be found internally, but commonly they can be inspected at close quarters by accessing the roof void itself, thus ruling them out if no other physical evidence is found. However, features on the exterior of your property, such as lifted or broken tiles, missing flashing, gaps around weatherboarding, cracks and gaps in brickwork, and many more things besides, are all potentially utilised by bats, especially crevice-dwelling species, which as the name suggests are extremely small creatures. A pipistrelle bat, for interest, is a lot smaller than you think. They can squeeze into gaps about the size of a 20p coin and weigh as little as a teaspoon of sugar. As you can guess then, they're bloody tricky to spot. Up to now, it all sounds very subjective, so here's a good way to conceptualise it. Think of a brand new building in a heavily urbanised setting. Perfect tiles, tight-fitting windows and doors, flawlessly pointed brickwork, no gaps anywhere. In this scenario, there are no features that a bat could use to roost, and obviously there's no aperture through which a bat can access and egress the structure. The result is a negligible classification of roost suitability, regardless of the siting of the property in relation to, for example, other known roosts and the probably quite poor quality and connectivity of habitat in the proximate and wider landscape. In this example, no further survey effort would reveal data that might change an ecologist's conclusions or recommendations about the building. The mitigation hierarchy in this context is therefore irrelevant, which loosely translates as pass go, collect $200. Now think about a 300-year-old church on the edge of a village, adjacent to a woodland and a pond, with an abundance of fields and hedgerows beyond. Absolute wreck of a roof, gaps and cracks everywhere, several stories tall, or maybe with a tower that can't be easily or safely accessed. The place could harbour hundreds of bats of a variety of species, both crevice and void dwelling. In this example, it would be near impossible to identify all of the features from ground level, let alone their likelihood of use or occupancy. Even sans evidence of activity, the roost suitability classification would be very high. As an aside, I really don't like the rather clunky classification system, but in general ecologists don't seem to get on well with statistics and numbers, so we play the cards we're dealt. In examples like this, an LPA demand for considerable further survey effort can be reasonably expected in order to yield data that is rich enough on which to base conclusions and recommendations for mitigation. In other words, the expectation as an outcome of the PRA is that bats are using the church, and thus the mitigation hierarchy must be considered. The hierarchy is a topic for another day, but briefly it involves the consideration of how you might go about your development while avoiding the disturbance of bat roosts, and if that isn't practicable, then mitigating and or compensating for that disturbance. You clearly can't do that adequately without knowing precisely the species, which may be plural, population numbers, and what they're using the site for. This is the sort of data that a Phase 2 or emergence survey, as opposed to a PRA, is designed to yield. And again, we'll talk more about Phase 2 surveys in another video. Finally, to frame the physical survey correctly, we must set the survey's results in the context of the wider landscape. So, we conduct a desk study of things like local biological records of note, the proximate habitat, and its linear or otherwise connectivity to nearby habitats of varying quality, such as watercourses, ancient woodland, and or designated sites. Between the findings of the desk study and the physical survey, a final classification can be offered for your site's roost suitability. The examples of the new build property and the old church we just talked about give you a flavour of what lies at each of the diametrically opposed ends of the roost suitability spectrum, and as you might expect, the great majority of the thousands of sites we survey each year lie somewhere in between. Of all those that need a PRA, only a fraction require a Phase 2 or emergence survey, and of those, only a fraction go any further. But before we get into talking about emergence surveys and what lies beyond, let's cover the remaining things you need to know about PRAs. It would be very remiss of me to talk about bat surveys without a discussion of costs and timings. First, the easy bit. A preliminary bat roost assessment can be done at any time of the year. It's a diurnal, by daylight bat survey, so in any conditions other than extremes of rain, fog or snow, features suitable for roosting can be easily identified. Seasonality, therefore, isn't a consideration. Now costs. Let's be clear here, if you're after having somebody have a quick scoot around, write a letter and charge you £100, you're absolutely in the wrong place. Nobody ever has got planning consent by half-jobbing a protected species survey. Like most professional consultancies with a strong track record and consultants whose names are known to your local planning authority, at Arbtech the very minimum you can expect to pay is about £300. In reality though, most PRA bat surveys are between £400 and £600, and these costs are exclusive of VAT. They vary according to normal economics. Things like the size and number of buildings you have and how quickly you need it will determine whether we can tie it into something else and pass that cost saving on to you. I obviously can't say don't do it, but I can caution you to be very wary of hiring anybody who seems alarmingly cheap. I can't count the number of clients over the years that have come to Arbtech and had to pay again to repeat a survey from scratch that someone has done a half job of. So if you come to us or another consultancy like us, of which there are many, you'll get a professional job and a hassle-free planning consent. If you hire someone else though, then good luck to you, because it's a flip of a coin whether you actually get a report worth the paper it's written on. While I'm on the subject of costs, at Arbtech, our fees are all inclusive. There's none of this rip-off 50 pence a mile nonsense, no extra charges for things that should be absolutely standard, like £100 for project management, and this always makes me laugh, £200 for writing a report, as if you can actually do anything with a survey that hasn't been written up. So whether you invite Arbtech or anyone else to quote to you, make sure you ask for and compare an all-inclusive fixed price that covers everything in their fees and expenses. A final thing you should note is that if your site is not classified as having negligible roost suitability, your local planning authority may expect you to buy something called biological record searches, or BRD, to incorporate into your report. This is a third-party disbursement, i.e. we buy it from a third-party provider like a local wildlife trust. In exactly the same way your conveyancing solicitor advises you to get searches done before you buy land or buildings, so we do the same with BRD. You don't have to have it at the PRA stage, and in fact, the negligible roost suitability sites, there's no compelling reason to procure it at all, but it will make your planning application more robust. The choice then is yours. We'll always make a recommendation one way or the other and inform you of the upfront cost of procuring it, which can range from completely free by up to several £100s, depending on your local provider and the scale of your site. And with that, I think I've covered just about everything you need to know about buying a BAT survey. What I recommend you do now is watch our mini-series of 20 most frequently asked questions about BAT surveys, or pick up the phone and call us, talk to a professional ecologist about how we can help you overcome BAT mitigation issues at your site. We know that our clients love the straightforward and highly professional service we provide because they tell us all the time. Just take a look through the hundreds of reviews on our website and you'll notice a familiar theme: professionalism, speed, and planning permission. That's what Arbtech's all about.
I wouldn't have any hesitation in recommending the work that they did.
Really very impressed.
It was great because it's very easy to understand and clear.
We always advise that Arbtech would provide a good, effective service.
The actual quality of the service was excellent. Obviously when we're dealing with quite high profile clients and developers and high net worth individuals, the quality of the consultants we bring in needs to be really good and slick, and Arbtech fitted into the way that we like to work.
Told me in layman's terms so I understood everything. I had a surveyor up on the land who was very professional, very easy to talk to.
But if I email them saying, I've got a client, this is what I want, then generally within 60 minutes I get a quotation.
We had ecologists coming and looking at the newts and things that were going on in the wildlife, and so we had to plan around the breeding times. But Arbtech were very good at getting us through the right channels at the right time to make sure the project reached completion within its deadlines.
From the start to the finish I felt very confident.
The quality of the reports and the way they were explained to us was second to none.
I never felt it complicated, it was easy, and it was definitely something we needed.